Welcome, everyone. We are just going to wait just about a minute here. I'm Larissa Cox with Buchanan Technologies, and I'm just going to give people a few minutes or a couple minutes just to jump on, and then we will start the presentation. I love that we're all in our homes, thanks to COVID-19. So I'll just say this again, just for people jumping on right now. We're going to wait just about 30 more seconds probably before we launch, just giving people, a minute or two to jump on. Okay, I think we will get going. It's 1:03. So we have our title slide up here now. Welcome, everyone. My name is Larissa Cox, and I am the Vice President of Marketing here at Buchanan Technologies. I want to thank everyone for joining today as we discuss the importance of cloud security and the myths and considerations around the cloud. And how you as a business leader can make informed decisions and deploy technologies that will positively impact your cloud environment and business processes. We're excited today to have Buchanan's own Chuck Maw, who serves as Director of Cloud Strategy, and RJ Friedman, our Chief Information Security Officer, who will be presenting with us today. Couple housekeeping items that I want to cover real quick. All attendees will automatically be muted. If you have questions throughout the webinar, please use the chat function. If time permits, we plan to have a Q&A session at the end of the call, and we will be addressing the most popular questions in that chat. If your question is not addressed, please know as a representative from Buchanan, we'll follow up shortly after the webinar. In addition, I want to point out that we have uploaded some relevant documents and resources that will supplement the information that we're presenting today, because we will be covering a lot. Please feel free to download those at your convenience. And with that, I'm going to turn it over to Chuck Maw.
Well, thank you, Larissa. Some of the topics that we're going to cover today include cloud security myths and realities, understanding risk in the cloud, best practices to achieve optimum cloud security, security considerations for your cloud adoption roadmap, and what to look for in a managed cloud service provider. And as Larissa said, we'll have some time. If we have some time afterwards, we'll do some Q&A. So let's just start out by discussing how cloud adoption continues to see significant growth. We've seen regular growth with cloud migration over the last few years, and public cloud spending is still expected to grow 18% in 2021. This indicates that the question businesses have been asking has changed from if they should move to the cloud to when they should make that leap of faith. Despite the consistent move to the cloud, some businesses are still hesitant, citing cloud security as one of the biggest deterrents. With that being said, we're curious to know what our audience thinks about the cloud being secure. We're going to be launching a poll right now, and you can submit your answer by choosing one of the choices pinned at the bottom of your screen. At the end of the presentation, we'll go over the results. Now, let's take a look at some of the most common cloud security misconceptions. I work with clients on their cloud solutions day in and day out. Although there's been a good level of cloud adoption, oftentimes I hear objections that make it clear to me that many businesses still possess some level of distrust of the cloud. They're skeptical that their business data can be secure in a cloud environment. As we break down what we're calling cloud security myths, let's talk about the one that I hear a lot, and that is the cloud isn't secure. Customers don't trust the cloud to house their data. RJ, how would you respond to that?
Yeah, hey Chuck, good question. Honestly, I think the opposite can be true. Emphasis on can be. It's really all in the execution, right? There's a lot of potential security benefits to the cloud, actually, but as with anything technical and complex, there can and will be security risks. Many people have, of course, heard of security breaches involving cloud deployments. And it's true. There have been plenty of cases where a company's cloud deployment has been affected by cyber criminals. But most, if not all, of those breaches did not actually take advantage of vulnerabilities in the cloud provider's infrastructure. It wasn't, Amazon or Google's fault. But 9 times out of 10, 99 times out of 100 even, they almost exclusively took advantage of vulnerabilities in place because of mistakes made by the team setting up the cloud environment. And that's a responsibility that ultimately falls on the business leveraging the cloud and not the cloud hosting provider. With that said, if you're meticulous in your deployment, it can be, even more secure than what most companies can afford to do on their own. These cloud providers spend millions upon millions of dollars shoring up their infrastructure and training their employees, monitoring, responding to threats, and even training their partners. That kind of budget is out of reach for most other companies.
Yeah, that's a really good point there, RJ. So I think what we're saying is that the cloud is actually more secure than an on-premise environment. And that's what we want people to understand. It's all about the can be or the execution. Well, let's move on to myth number 2. Myth number 2 is that the cloud has a larger attack surface since it is public and widely used. Can you elaborate for the audience on whether or not that should be a real concern for a business, RJ?
Yeah, and when you first think about it, the myth may actually seem true. In a sense, it's true that the cloud has a wider presence than most organizations do on their own. Microsoft has over 150 data centers, right? Most organizations don't have anywhere near that kind of footprint. However, most organizations have a much, much larger attack surface than they even realize. Our friends over at Bit Discovery have created an entire market out of helping enterprises understand their attack surface. And that's because many organizations, certainly any over, a couple years old with multiple locations, have over the years had different IT people in charge of deployments, and with that, and also considering, of course, the fact that most organizations don't run, a very locked down ITIL shop where everything's tracked and managed and logged perfectly. And even organizations that do try ITIL will have some of those issues. That will, result in assets falling off the grid, so to speak. And that's just talking about sanctioned applications and devices. Shadow IT is a huge problem there as well. But when you securely, accurately deploy in the cloud, there's a few key advantages to helping keep track of the size and scope of your attack surface. So first off, all major cloud providers have a built-in auditing and logging monitoring as well. That helps a lot with basic inventory. Even major security framework, every major security framework starts by telling you that you need to understand your hardware and software inventories. And that's a lot easier when done in the cloud. When you couple those built-in tools with security deployment best practices, your attack surface is going to be a lot smaller in the cloud than it is on an on-prem environment 9 times out of 10. And that 1 time out of 10, it's at least a lot more visible by default.
Well, thanks, RJ. It's certainly very interesting when you understand the actual facts behind the cloud versus on-premise. I find that just in conversation and in education, we can help customers eliminate some of those risks. And that's really good. So let's talk about the final myth here. And so RJ, on the screen here, it says, I'm just an SMB. Nobody wants to hack me.
Yeah. Yeah, that's a bit related to the last myth, right? A lot of people assume that they won't be targeted because they're a small business. Who wants to hack me? There's a famous quote by we won't call them out, but someone who made hammers, where the CEO was called out in a meeting, or this was after they were breached, but said, we just make hammers. Who would want to attack us, right? That goes for all types of businesses of all shapes and sizes. Everyone is a target. And actually, over half of successful attacks each year happen against businesses that are classified as small businesses. Think about that for a second, right? They're not always just going after Walmart. And it's a lot easier to go after those small businesses for many reasons. First off, they don't have the security budgets that a Walmart does. They're low-hanging fruit. It's like that saying, you don't have to be faster than the bear, you just have to be faster than your friend. Well, these attackers are like bears, and the majority of them are indiscriminately targeting the slowest runner, so to speak. There's obvious exceptions, right? Speaking of bears, like APT 29, the group behind the DNC breach, or other advanced persistent threats, who specifically target whales and go after those big fish out there, like Walmart, Home Depot, Target, etc. But another reason that your small business is more of a target is that it's also easier for us to enumerate your network when you have a purely on-premise deployment. It's actually easier for us, for hackers, to find everything you own and search it for holes. The cloud kind of provides a bit of safety in numbers, right? You're covered a little bit by the traffic of everyone else in a sense, because most of these large clouds do have a set number of egress points, and it's much more difficult to pinpoint one particular client in the cloud than they are in their own environment. So advanced persistent threats actually will have a more difficult time pinpointing even larger organizations' cloud deployments, although it's obviously not impossible to do.
Okay, great. Thanks, RJ. And that's a great example with the bears. So I'll just be sure to practice my running. So in summary, I'm putting back on the screen now the 3 myths we just discussed and the actual truth that is around these myths and the cloud. So these are some useful myth breakers for everyone as they work towards migrating to the cloud. Okay, so if these myths are overblown, let's talk about some real risks associated with the cloud. In the data here, we see that what enterprise organizations say are the top 3 threats to cloud security. The first one here, 68% of organizations say that misconfiguration of the cloud platform is a real threat for them. So RJ, what's your thoughts on that one?
Yeah, there can definitely be risks associated with the cloud, but the risks associated with it aren't necessarily exclusive to the cloud. Many of them are risks that businesses are already facing, and I think that for the most part, the cloud has been unfairly criticized when things go wrong.
Right. Well, so why don't you just take some time to elaborate on what you mean by go wrong?
Okay. One example would be misconfigurations. It's a huge issue in the cloud. As we showed, 68% of cloud breaches involve misconfiguration. And actually, a study by Verizon showed that nearly all misconfigurations at their clients weren't actually found by the clients, but were found by their security team that was brought in to analyze or look at the cloud environment. Which basically means that most people, if they have things misconfigured, they're really not going back and checking it, right? So with that said, misconfigurations aren't unique to the cloud; they happen every day. And in many ways, it's actually easier to check for those issues in the cloud than on-prem, which is maybe why they seem to come up more often.
Well, that's great. And we have seen that. And this is one area where businesses are definitely leaning on human interaction to configure things correctly and check them, as you mentioned with the Verizon example. Can you give us some other examples of how things might get misconfigured and why it might be easier to see something like that in the cloud?
Yeah, absolutely. There's a lot of settings in these cloud providers' admin portals, right? They're built to be very robust for the most sophisticated users, and they handle very sophisticated deployments. So, a lot of the times, if you have let's say a smaller business, smaller customer who is looking at what can be considered an easy and simple deployment, maybe just a few servers here and there, there's a lot of settings in there which can easily be overlooked. That, of course, can lead to security issues when someone who isn't an expert or certified in the cloud does those settings, right? And that person may not know how to turn off a specific setting or set up an integration. They don't know what buttons to press and levers to pull, so to speak. One very simple example of that would actually be one that we find a lot when we do cloud security assessments for our clients, specifically in O365. So we do this assessment where we basically will check our client security configurations, and actually quite often, especially in an account that's new, we'll go in and we'll find that two-factor authentication isn't deployed properly. Or for example, we'll see that someone forgot to or didn't know the importance of turning on audit logs. The risk with this particular misconfiguration is, of course, that it's easier for attackers to log into accounts which don't have multi-factor or MFA. We actually published a report last year with Google on election security, and MFA was ranked the #1 thing that the congressional campaigns we were writing the report for could implement to improve cybersecurity. Yet, we're finding many established businesses don't have their free multi-factor turned on, which is built into their cloud environments, and that's a huge issue.
Well, those are great points, RJ, and yeah, there's really what we're saying is that it's, many times that people have concerns about the cloud, they can be alleviated by proper checks and balances to provide that confidence in their security.
Yeah.
Great. Well, let's jump to the next point from that graphic, which was that 58% of cloud breaches involved unauthorized access. And so, do you consider that to be unique to the cloud?
No, it's not unique, not to the cloud, and actually, just like with some of the other risks, it's actually easier to weed out unauthorized access in the cloud. Kind of going back to my past example where I talked about how logging sometimes isn't turned on. Well, any properly configured cloud environment actually operates a lot closer to a zero trust model than most enterprise networks. Lots of logging anytime someone goes and authenticates, and the monitoring and alerting associated with suspicious logins are easier to configure. They don't require a full-blown SIM solution, for example, like they would on premise.
Okay, so just for the audience, let's take a second to look at what you mean by zero trust, and then a little bit more in terms of what you mean by SIM.
Okay, yeah. When I say a properly configured cloud environment operates like a zero trust network, it's basically a concept in security which involves treating your network somewhat like it's a Starbucks Wi-Fi, with the assumption that everyone trying to connect is trying to do something bad, right? Unless they can prove otherwise, unless they prove that they're supposed to be there. Cloud management portals should be very secure, as should all the devices within them. And as mentioned, it's so much easier to build those walls around a cloud environment than on-prem because, well, you have full visibility of what you're deploying, who's deploying it, and physically speaking, all of this hardware is sitting in a data center that's guarded by armed people and have tons of redundancy. So Google, Amazon, Microsoft are really running data centers as secure as Fort Knox. As for the SIM, it stands for Security Information and Event Management, SIEM. Not to dwell too long on that subject today, but a SIM can be thought of as a database which ingests logs from many data sources throughout your network and then checks for suspicious indicators. Logins, for example, can be tracked and logged, and then rules can be built to alert you if, say, someone performs what's called impossible travel. They log in from Dallas, Texas, and then Los Angeles within a few moments. That would defy the laws of physics, and thus we can create an alert around it. And that type of technology and alerting is actually built in to every major cloud provider's interface for cloud security, but it's actually fairly complicated to deploy manually within an on-premise environment. So, that said, even though this type of tech is built into the cloud, as mentioned, we do see it misconfigured or ignored pretty frequently. With that in mind, why don't we discuss what businesses need to consider to make sure their transition is secure and configured correctly?
Great, sure.
All right, so let's put you on the spot now. What would you say is your #1 tip to customers who are planning on moving to the cloud?
Right. Well, we recommend that, well, just like they say on TV, you don't try this at home. Businesses can have their own IT teams and their own security teams, but they may not have that in-depth knowledge of the cloud or know how to move their assets to the cloud in a secure way. And we always recommend that they engage a partner that has that experience and who has done that before for other customers. That way, the partner can not only assist in making the transition happen, but they can then hand that knowledge back to your team to run it if that's their preference. Well, let me ask you, RJ, a question then. What do you consider to be a number one tip?
From a security perspective?
Sure.
All right. Yeah, it's kind of mentioned. I think there are so many misconceptions that the cloud is so different from an on-prem environment, which really it's not. Not at least when considering cybersecurity strategy. Um, so, with that, I think the advice would be very similar. In general, we advise our clients who operate in the cloud to treat it much like they would in any of their other business locations and involve it in the company's broader cybersecurity program. As with any cybersecurity program, you generally start with figuring out what your risk is, what your exposure may cost you, who's responsible for mitigating that risk, and what controls you can put into place to mitigate the risk. One of the first decisions a business needs to make in terms of cybersecurity is which framework it wants to abide by, a cybersecurity framework. NIST and CIS have pretty user-friendly documentation and tools. Aligning with either of those are actually really good choices for most businesses. Um, Businesses in more regulated industries, finance, healthcare, et cetera, may have some additional compliance standards and should go with frameworks that fit those standards, though. That said, having a security practice run by someone dedicated to reducing your risk, and, not just your IT guy, right, but someone like a CISO, is one of the best things that an organization can do to reduce cyber risk as well, including in the cloud. Most organizations really aren't at a size or scale to run their own security teams. Even some of the largest Fortune 500 clients come to us to run portions of their teams. And there are some other great service providers out there, including us, who can offer services, strategic services too, like chief information security officer as a service, or we call it virtual CISO, to more specific security functions, like running an email security team, or just doing assessments, like a cloud security assessment.
Oh, sure, that makes sense. And we often find that IT and security teams are at different ends of the spectrum for the network, right? Like the security wants to restrict access to data and to protect it, and IT is tasked with giving access to the data. Well, you mentioned something here that I want to expand on because people sometimes don't realize it's available. So let's talk a little bit about what should be included in a cloud security assessment.
Okay. There's a few different types of cloud assessments, and really depending on which vendor you talk to, or which CISO or security guy you talk to, it could mean a whole bunch of different things. But specifically here at Buchanan, we have a few different ones that we do for our customers. There's one that we're doing right now called an M365 assessment, and as the name alludes, we're really only looking at the M365 deployment with this assessment. Essentially, what we do is compare, 30 or so configurations in a customer's environment against the CIS benchmarks for M365. The CIS benchmarks are basically a list of best practices and configurations, and what we do is highlight the areas that they aren't aligned. And then we offer a roadmap to alignment, as well as we can monitor for configuration changes, which is actually a pretty common tactic with advanced attacks, where they'll go in and the attackers will gain access to the cloud and they'll actually change configurations. That happened with some of the more recent popular attacks. Similar and more manual assessments can also be done for cloud hosting environments. So, Azure or AWS, for example, where we can go through in the management portal and go through each setting to make sure that best practices are being adhered to. And of course, we could do all of our normal assessments as well in the cloud. So any type of a risk assessment, penetration testing, compromise assessments, any of those. And for those unfamiliar, compromise assessment is basically just a way to answer the question, are we currently hacked? It's a pretty neat one that we do here, and we go through and look at basically anything that's running or scheduled to run in an environment, including a cloud environment, Linux, et cetera, determine if it can do anything malicious. But as I mentioned, Chuck, one of the most important things is doing this right from the onset, using a procedural and security-aware approach to migrate to the cloud the first time around is a lot better than going back and trying to patch up holes or reinvent the wheel in terms of security. So with that said, in summary, I think our 4 best practices for optimum cloud security, I'd say don't try this at home, right? Partner with a managed cloud service provider. You definitely want to establish a cybersecurity program and follow those frameworks. perform routine assessments within your environment, right? Security isn't a one-stop shop. It's a living, breathing entity that you need to do constantly. And take a secure, aware approach in your cloud migration as well.
Well, I completely agree with you, RJ. And if a business isn't aware of their potential risks, then they won't have a true understanding of the processes and steps that they need to take to protect themselves. Well, let's keep moving here. And as we think about what we've covered today, what a critical step is going to be building your cloud roadmap with security considerations. And the first stage for your roadmap is planning. So at this stage, you should be identifying what assets, that is workloads or data, that you want to move to the cloud. There could be a variety of reasons for that. For instance, aging on-premise hardware, a pending hardware refresh, or a requirement for more computing power. You'll want to engage your CISO to provide any insight on how to further secure the planned environment and to begin developing cloud security policies and procedures. And you should also engage your compliance team to ensure that you are adhering to all industry regulations. As you identify the assets, you'll want to perform a few assessments, which is the second stage. One of the assessments is an impact analysis, and this identifies the dependencies and interdependencies of the assets you plan on moving. The goal of the impact analysis is to answer the questions: what's going to break or change if I move this workload to the cloud? And how will my internal and external customers be affected by this move? And from a security perspective, now would be a great time to perform a risk assessment. So that's one of the things that RJ mentioned before. And this will provide you with a clear baseline of what risks your workloads are facing today in the current environment. And the results of these assessments will be fed back into your plan for migration. Well, now for the migration stage, you're going to need to lay out a detailed timeline and project plan that reflects the goals of your organization's move to the cloud and minimizes impact to the end users. Minimizing impact to the end users is important to adoption and building confidence in the cloud. As many of you have experienced, even the slightest hiccup in a migration project may end up in a technology or solution being blamed by the end users as the cause of their issue. Well, after the migration and at this point, before transferring any at-risk data to your cloud, it's important to review your cloud architecture and security controls. So once your migration steps have been approved and the resources have been assigned, you can begin your deployment to the cloud. And this usually includes piloting the workload or asset in the cloud to ensure that all of your planning and testing is sound. Remember that risk assessment that you did back in stage 2? Well, now would be a great time to revisit that risk assessment to validate the new environment in the cloud before you move any critical or sensitive data. You can compare the results with your on-premise assessments to see how the security measures you have implemented in the cloud have improved the score. Now that your organization is in the cloud, or at least some of the assets are, you'll be in operational mode or in ongoing management. You'll want to monitor things like utilization to manage your consumption costs of the cloud, backups and disaster recovery testing, and so on. But equally important is to perform ongoing security assessments of your cloud environment. Each time you perform an assessment, it's just a snapshot in time, identifying and remediating misconfiguration errors, reducing the number of admins or global admins, reducing risk of breaches or loss of data are regular events, whether you perform them annually, monthly, or even daily. Well, this roadmap is still a fairly high-level overview of what needs to be done, and I'm sure there are a lot of finer details that will be unique to your business. Let's take a few minutes now to talk about our final topic: what to look for in a managed cloud services provider. Businesses need to work with a partner that has all of the capabilities to complement their in-house expertise. This will make for an efficient use of resources and a strong working relationship. It also removes the complexities of dealing with multiple vendors. They can help you take a more strategic approach by identifying a roadmap and prioritizing cloud initiatives, since a managed CSP partner will have a more holistic understanding of your environment. The trust that you build up with your partner will go a long way to helping build and secure your business in the cloud. And a strong partner will support you throughout your cloud adoption journey, in addition to helping you execute for long-term success. So here are some of the questions that you should be asking when in search of a managed cloud solution provider partner. I guess the first one in terms of customer satisfaction is, does the CSP have a proven track record? Are they have a good record of customer satisfaction and success? Second question is with respect to their capabilities. Can the CSP provide the services that I need when I need them? Do they have end-to-end capabilities that cover my entire journey to the cloud adoption? Another question is on business processes, is what do the CSP's business processes look like from a governance, planning, risk management, strategy, and compliance perspective? Under administration support, does the CSP consistently meet their SLAs? What do their performance reporting, billing, and accounting and configuration management look like? Technically, what kind of support does the CSP offer for deployments, upgrades, operational and change management? And finally, and probably most importantly, what security measures does the CSP have in place relating to infrastructure, policies, and physical security? And what security services can the CSP provide to reduce the risk to their customers? We're just about to wrap up here, RJ, but maybe you can take a few minutes to provide some questions businesses should ask a CSP about their security practice.
Yeah, sure. You know, I hope throughout the presentation we've kind of I've been trying to make sure that we're normalizing the cloud, right? It's really not that different. You have to treat it just like any other environment, and you know, in this case, with a vendor, you have to treat the vendor just like you would with any other. You want to make sure that you're doing a thorough assessment around that vendor's risk. There's a lot of great standard questionnaires out there that I won't go through, but feel free to reach out, and if you know you need those questionnaires, they're all over the place. But lots of processes around that as well, and standards, right? But I do find also that you know, having an informal question can add a lot of context that's pretty important. And you can ask questions in a way that you get a much more clear and maybe less diplomatic answer, right? Probably closer to the truth than some of their sheets they filled out for you. Well, for example, you can ask your service provider what cybersecurity framework they use or recommend. You know, super easy question, but you'd actually be surprised at how many managed service companies I've spoken to that don't have an answer to that. They don't actually subscribe to a cybersecurity framework, and that should be a flag, right? Next, you can ask them what type of steps they take to ensure you know, that things are configured correctly. What checks and audits are in place to make sure that cloud environments are configured in you know, a secure way. If they don't have a separate team going in and reviewing the work of the team, if they don't have you know, a higher level person coming in and checking and as far as going through and looking at security controls for their customers, I bet they're going to miss something. You know, even the best people do.
Yeah, thanks. So so what we're really saying is vetting your potential cloud security partner is really an important step to ensuring your business is secure. Well, that's all the topics we've got to cover today, and so I'm going to hand this back over to Larissa.
Okay, thanks guys. That was great information. I know that we are a little under, but I do want to take some time for some questions. You know, right now we're putting the poll up, and you should be able to see that in the bottom of your screen where you took the poll. So you should be able to see the results there. And I want to, you know, thank Chuck and RJ for their time today. I know that they put a lot of preparation into sharing this information with you, and we are very grateful for that. So I do have a few questions here that I want to just kind of tackle, and I'll just kind of, you know, round robin it. I think the first one, Chuck, is for you. What is the typical timeline for an organization to do a full cloud deployment?
Well, that's a good question, and it really does depend on the environment that you're migrating. We've done migrations that have you know, gone very short. I would consider you know, a 3 or 4 week migration where we've basically lifted and shifted a customer's entire environment into the cloud. We don't recommend that approach for everybody, but it is something that can be done. more typically, what we've seen is a more methodical approach where workloads are being gradually migrated to the cloud, and that can be done over a period of months or even a couple of years.
Okay. Okay. Hope that answers it. Next question, RJ, I'll put you on the spot. What does a security assessment entail?
Good question. So, there's kind of a whole bunch of different ones. So, security assessment, that's kind of broad. We try to get a little more granular when naming them. In the cloud, there's a few different that we can do. That are specific to the cloud, and one would be kind of a cloud security control type assessment. That's where we're going through and we're looking at all the settings in a customer's cloud environment and comparing them to standards, our best practices, CIS's best practices, as well as we have some other resources that we can utilize for that as well. But essentially, what we're doing is going through and auditing those settings. As far as what it entails, if you're looking for the specifics there, really it would be kind of a consulting engagement with one of our security engineers who would work with you or your technical resource to go through and really perform that audit for you. And that would be what that entails there.
Okay. This next one actually ties a little bit to that, RJ. Does a compromise assessment work in a Linux environment?
Yes, it does. Most flavors of Linux, we can do one of these compromise assessments. Essentially, what we're doing is pulling volatile memory and analyzing it for any programs or tools that can do anything malicious. So it's a little different than logging, right? Where we're looking at things that have already done something bad, and we're looking more for kind of the potential of badness in modules and memory injections and scripts and et cetera. And we're able to do that in Linux, Mac, and of course Windows too.
Okay, great. Okay, well, I think that actually does it. There was just a few questions there. If you have another question that you didn't get to or you didn't feel comfortable, asking on the webinar, feel free. We're going to actually put Chuck and RJ's information back up on screen right now. And their emails are there. So these are, our experts in this area, and they are welcome to have a conversation with you and try to just give you a little bit more information. And then we also have our 888 number and our, solutions email off to the side. If you don't want to speak directly to them, but you have a more generic question and you'd like to reach out to Buchanan, that is the way to do it. This webinar will be on demand for a rewatch. And pay attention to our channel. We will be doing a few more of these in the future with different topics, and we welcome you all back. And with that, I will say good day. Thank you all.